Greetings, programs. Welcome to episode 26, How to be right by trying to be wrong and failing. This is another practical epistemology episode. So, like some others, this episode is also a follow-on from a previous episode. In this case, video 12, Epistemology and Evidence, and episode 19, Evidence still does not work that way, but particularly episode 5, How Role-Playing Taught Me Critical Thinking. This particular episode looks at how the basic process of science works and how it fundamentally differs from everyday processes of thought that ordinary folks might use. So like always, we need to do some groundwork. How does a typical person do stuff, and why is it that they don't brain so good? And then, how does that compare to the scientific process? And then, why is it that it works so well but seems so intuitively wrong? This would be why people don't do it. After all, we know the scientific process works. We are surrounded by near magical things that demonstrate beautifully that, yeah, science really works. So why don't just people automatically just do the science stuff in everyday life? Well, this should answer why. The answer is pretty simple. Like we discussed in some of our previous episodes, it's because the foundation of a lot of our cognition and thought processes are arse backwards and just plain wrong. So let's look at that. So how does a regular person do the thinky thing? Well, unless they have a strong science background or fairly deep knowledge of cognitive sciences, it goes something like this. A person comes up with an idea, and then they go looking for evidence to support that idea and show that they're right. Seems pretty straightforward and sensible, right? Well, no, not really. Because humans have a number of built-in flaws in their brains, biases we call them. And one of them is sometimes called the mother of all biases, the confirmation bias. From Wikipedia, confirmation bias, also called confirmatory bias or my-side bias, is the tendency to search for, interpret, favor, and recall information in a way that confirms one's pre-existing belief or hypotheses. See footnote number 1 for the Wikipedia entry. Which means, once you have an idea, you go looking for information that proves you to be right. Which sounds pretty sensible, but you also need to know if you are wrong. Because once we start looking for ways for us to be right, we tend to ignore evidence that shows us to be wrong. And this means we can in fact end up on a wild goose chase, looking for more and more ways to be right, never actually checking to see if we are in fact wrong, and we get ourselves emotionally invested in being right, which can stop us from ever checking and prevent us from wanting to check for fear that we may discover that we are wrong, and eventually leads us to becoming hostile to investigation for that reason. If you are afraid or upset by the idea of people investigating what you have to say, that's probably a sign that on some level you know there is something for them to find that you won't like. Anybody that has interacted online with a strictly religious person, or one of these folks who just says there are only two genders, ha ha ha, is going to be aware of this, because as soon as you start asking questions and chipping away at it, they get angry and defensive, and it's quite obvious. Now, onto the science. Okay, so now what? Well, no one is free from bias, and never will be. But we can work to mitigate it, and the scientific method is a bloody good start in that. No, I'm not talking about wearing lab coats, or doing things with test tubes. I'm talking about the process. And the simplified process description of the scientific method is, well, pretty simple. Step 1. Make an observation. Step 2. Step 2. Make a hypothesis to explain the observation. Step 3. Investigate to uncover evidence that you are wrong. Step 4. If after many attempts you have failed to find any evidence that you're wrong, then there's a good chance that you are provisionally right, or at least right for now. Or, to put it in a more human term, before you start shooting your mouth off about things, look very hard to see if there are any weaknesses in what you are saying. If someone critical of what you're saying were to examine what you just said very closely, what would they find to complain about? Could they come up with a more plausible sounding explanation? Does the evidence actually support what you are saying? Or to follow on from my previous video, cultivate your own inner Blair. Have a little part of you that constantly checks what you're saying to see if you mucked up, and try to detach your ego from the situation. No one likes being wrong. it's embarrassing. But the rational response to being showed that you are wrong is to update your understanding, and not double down on what you said and become even more wrong. Now, on to ego. Binding our position on a subject to our own sense of self is a bad idea, because it makes us want to fight, to hold on to the idea, when the rational thing to do is to update our understanding of things when new evidence is discovered. New evidence is good. It helps us stop being wrong. And regardless of your position on any given topic, you are already right or already wrong, regardless of whether you're aware of that fact or not. You do not suddenly become wrong just because someone shows you a new bit of evidence. You always were wrong. It's only now that you've become aware of that fact. And arguing or complaining about it will not suddenly make you not wrong. You only have two choices: update your ideas or remain wrong. Be a person who holds ideas. Don't identify yourself as a Republican or a climate denier or a whatever. Insert object here. Don't bind your identity to a position, because then you cannot change your stance on a thing without abandoning some part of yourself, which, given human nature, means that you'll never change your stance. Here is something called the Litany of Gwendolen, which explains it nicely. What is true is already so. Owning up to it doesn't make it worse. Not being open about it doesn't make it go away. And because it is true, it is what is there to be interacted with. Anything untrue is not there to be lived. People can stand what is true because they are already enduring it. Quote from Eugene Gendlin. Or to put it another way, believing with all your heart that cigarettes are not bad for you will not stop you dying of lung cancer. You either will or will not get lung cancer. How you think about it will not change reality, though not smoking will probably help in that regard. So, to summarize today's hopefully short episode, always check to see if you can be wrong. It is better for your position and less embarrassing if you spot it, rather than getting pulled up when you shoot off your mouth. And don't tie yourself to your position, because then you'll never change it, and that is unwise in the extreme. That's all for today. Tune in next week for an episode that I have not decided on yet. Bye for now.